Good evening, everybody who is on tonight. My name is Jackie, and I will be walking us through this Equipped Live for November. I do want to apologize for some technical issues we had yesterday on the originally scheduled day for this event. Sometimes things are just out of your control, so we rescheduled it, and we'll get to the same topic that we were going to cover yesterday. We'll get to it today. I want to get Greg live here so we can talk to him about entrepreneurship in the IFMC. So let's get him on the live screen. Hi, Greg.
Hello, Jackie.
Hey, so we're going to talk about entrepreneurship, and I believe it was President Obama who kind of dedicated November as National Entrepreneur Month, and there's even a day in November that is actually National Entrepreneur Day, but because I can't always remember the day, I like to just say the whole month and talk about that. So we thought we'd talk today about entrepreneurship, but as it's related to the IFMC. So to start with that, I know when you look up the definition of entrepreneurship, it really does talk about starting a business or, owning a business, growing a business, whatever that may be. That's a little bit different, I think, than maybe within the IFMC, how that's utilized, because not everybody who's an entrepreneur or entrepreneur-minded in the IFMC is actually owning a business someday. So can you talk about the definition you use of entrepreneur and how it applies to the IFMC?
Sure. I think a real easy way to look at that is to look at entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship as the work of converting an idea into a profitable business. Now that includes quite a bit of different work, but you can kind of categorize that into three different types of work. One is converting the idea into a vision. Another type of work is converting that vision actually into a product or a service. And then the third type of work is converting that product or service into a profitable business. And those are three pretty different types of work, take a pretty broad range of competencies to do that. And so a lot of times the entrepreneur or the intrapreneur needs to facilitate others helping out or working on a lot of that. But that tends to be the work. It's pretty generally accepted that process takes about 3 to 4 years to go from idea to a profitable business. And in the venture capital world, it's pretty widely accepted that 8 out of 10 attempts are going to fail. So it's a different type of work. It's challenging. An entrepreneur, like you said, Jackie, typically is viewed as the person that, at least in the real early stages, funds that work themselves, or after they run out of their own funding, they'll typically go to what in the venture capital world are referred to as friends, fools, and family for the next round. And when they burn through that, then they'll typically go to angel investors or venture capitalists. Intrapreneurs do the same work, but the funding typically comes from their employer.
Okay.
And that's typically what we're doing in the IFMC, is more intrapreneurship than entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. Yeah, that clarification or distinction makes a lot of sense. So I know this next question is almost impossible to answer in a very short amount of time. We were kind of laughing about it while we were waiting for this to start. But can you just name one or two or a few of the many, many things that have happened in the IFMC because of that entrepreneur mindset?
Yeah, I'll try to do justice to one of those, Jackie. It turns out I'm kind of glad that we had the technical difficulties last night, because I had some ideas today and ended up talking to a couple people just to remind myself of some of the history here. But what I'd like to do is talk about the shredder business and just kind of walk through some of that history. And I think that'll be a pretty good example.
Okay.
If we go way back to the late 70s, early 80s. Of course, whole different time period, still using the rotary dial telephone and no computers, etc. But one of the inventions that did exist was a paper shredder. And my brother Ron bought a little shredder, and I think the thing would only do maybe 2 or 3 sheets at a time, and you almost needed earplugs to operate it. It was so loud. But Ron had that in his office, and my sister Deb did a lot of the administrative work, the accounting work, did a lot of programming, and so she had paper that she wanted to shred occasionally. And so she would go into Ron's office and shred that, and of course that was pretty irritating for Ron. And so he eventually got fed up with that, bought a larger shredder that was, I don't know, maybe half horsepower and might have been able to do 20 sheets at a time. But now that was located out in a common area in the office where others could use it without irritating him. And at that same time, we were struggling with some of the early stage financing issues that a lot of startups struggle with. And so I was in the office late one night, and I was just contemplating how to drum up more business, how to help get ourselves into a better financial position. And I got looking at that shredder and got wondering, I wonder what's under that cover. So I took the cover off, got looking at that and thought, man, we could make these things. And so I started to tear it apart and started to make some sketches of that. And then I realized that, I could solve another problem here too. So I put it all back together. And the next day I went out and I talked to Jim LaFleur. Jim LaFleur was the union steward in the shop at the time. And Jim and I butted heads a lot. He was doing his best to take good care of the guys and make sure that the company wasn't abusing them. I was trying to satisfy customers, and sometimes we didn't agree on things. And so we butted heads quite a bit. But one of the things that Jim, in his effort to help the guys and really do well for the company, he would always complain about the mistakes that were coming out of the engineering office. And the guys in the shop a lot of times didn't respect the guys in the office because there were mistakes on the drawings. And so I had tried to explain to Jim that, how difficult it is, because at that time we didn't have CAD. We're hand sketching everything. We're putting dimensions on the drawings that are not to scale. And so it's pretty easy to make a mistake and not catch it. But when you're actually trying to make the part, it's really obvious when something isn't right. And so I had tried to explain that to Jim, but it was like he didn't hear it. He didn't want to hear it. And so what I realized was, you know what? I'm going to have Jim tear this shredder apart. I'm going to have Jim make all the sketches, and I'm going to have Jim make the first unit. And when we're done, we're going to have an exact replica. We're going to prove that we can build this thing, and Jim is going to understand what it's like to work in engineering. And so we did that, and turns out Jim's tone did change, and we did have a replica that worked. And that really was the very first shredder that we manufactured. So now we had done some of the work of creating that product that I talked about earlier. Side note here with Jim LaFleur, Jim and I grew to really respect each other and really appreciate each other. Matter of fact, Jim ended up plant manager of Amerishred Industrial and ended up a really valuable player on the team. Has since retired, but so Jim and I got past that, and I really respect him now. Now we've got the machine that works. We've got some sketches. Now Jim Leesburg, who I'm sure some people know, is brought on, and he's designing additional shredder models. John Bartel was engaged. John Bartel was out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and he was selling the shredders. But it turns out he wasn't just selling the shredders, he was selling shredder business packages. So he was literally putting entrepreneurs in business so that we could provide the shredders. And so, this was really, I think, a good example of the entrepreneurship piece, because that John was finding those people and actually causing sales of shredders to supplement that. So as time went on, Randy Bodwine ended up helping us in the shop. Jim LaFleur is now running the shop at Amerishred Industrial. Randy Bodwine, who I'm sure a lot of folks know, ended up helping out with industrial engineering and streamlining the manufacturing process. Randy has since, he's actually been with the company almost 45 years now. He's still with Amerishred, still doing service calls, and very valuable to the organization. Gary St. Charles, another guy that was working in the shop at Amerishred Industrial, ended up moving into engineering, doing electrical work, doing other types of work. Jim Leesburg and Gary have gone on to join and be key players at Enduraveyor. And another fellow that's really valuable is Jeff Bodwine, Randy's son, who actually designed the first mobile shredders as part of his thesis project at Kettering University. And so Jeff now is operations manager of Amos, one of the shredder companies. So, there's a little history of how an idea can get turned into a vision, the vision can get turned into a product, the product can get turned into a profitable company. But that followed the same path of lots of financial struggles, lots of twists and turns and hardship. But I think at the end of the day, a lot of people happy that they were part of it.
So that's one of the many stories. I mean, you can tell, we could be here all night and talk about other examples of that. So that's really cool to have those kinds of stories in entrepreneurial. And it's exciting when you see new things come about from just someone's idea. The only follow-up question I have to that is, you said that you took the shredder apart that was in the hallway and then you put it back together, but did you really put it back together?
I didn't have it very far apart.
Okay. I thought maybe you'd just leave it for your brother and sister to find in the morning.
No.
So what are some ways that those who tend to think maybe more naturally, maybe it's something that they've practiced, to think more of an entrepreneurial type way versus those who maybe aren't thinking that way? What are some of those differences that you notice?
I think intrapreneurs tend to be tinkerers. They tend to wonder about things, wonder how it works. Sometimes they try to solve problems that aren't really problems, but they're curious, and they tend to be good problem solvers, and they tend to be able to develop a vision. They can see past the current reality, and they can envision a better future. And there was one article that my daughter sent to me that was really interesting. And that article talked about the correlation between highly successful entrepreneurs and growing up in a dysfunctional family. And that doesn't mean that just because you may have come from a dysfunctional family that you're going to be a highly successful entrepreneur. Doesn't mean that that is the case for every highly successful entrepreneur, but there was a correlation between highly successful entrepreneurs and coming from a dysfunctional family. And my takeaway from that article was that the kids that come out of dysfunctional families learned how to start seeing past the current reality, developing a vision, developing a dream of what they wanted things to be like, and had lots of time to practice that, and they just got good at it. And as they get good at it, when you get into adulthood and you experience regular life, that's the way they think. That's what they learned. And so that was interesting. The other thing, and you almost have to know Kristen to appreciate this, but when she sent that article to me, she was just starting a business of her own, and she just sends an email. There's no information in the body of it. There's just this attachment, and then the subject line, it said, "If you would have been more dysfunctional, I'd have more sales."
I do know Kristen, so that is funny. Oh, that's great. So
one other thing that I think is telling here too, with the Midland Institute, the Creating Entrepreneurial Opportunities, which Economic Generator Network is starting in Northeast Michigan. One of the interesting takeaways from that program is that when they're dealing with the junior and seniors in high school, that's the main type of folks that are involved in that program, it turns out that typically the students that do really well in school don't do very well in the CEO program or the entrepreneurial program, but the troubled students do well. And there seems to be a correlation there between, again, the amount of problems that the kids had to solve at an early age versus maybe the ability to focus on schoolwork and get good at schoolwork.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. We're a little bit over our time, but that's okay. I want to get through one more question, and so if there are folks that are on that need to drop off, they know how to access this after. So thinking like an entrepreneur is something that you can learn. You can train yourself to think differently about things, and people, in my opinion, should strive to do that all the time in their lives. But what is the value in the IFMC for an individual to maybe start thinking about training themselves or thinking more like an entrepreneur for the IFMC? I mean, what's in it for the IFMC? And it's, oh, well, they're just going to get another product they can sell and make money. But what's in it for the individual at that level for them to kind of think about, maybe I should be more curious and think about different ideas I have?
Well, I think it's really both financial rewards, but probably more important is just a real sense of satisfaction if they put a priority on solving someone else's problem, usually a customer, but that could be an external customer, an internal customer. But if they put a priority on solving somebody else's problem ahead of their own self-interest, customers can sense that and they'll respond well to that. And if you are able to solve other people's problems, you're able to cause that to result in them sending you money, that's entrepreneurship. And when I talk about putting the customer's problem ahead of your own self-interest, I'm not saying you need to do it at a loss. As a matter of fact, you can't do it sustainably at a loss. You have to do it at a profit. But if you're able to solve other people's problems, there's a tremendous amount of satisfaction that comes from that, and that's the main reward. And in psychology, I'm certainly not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, but I've read studies that talk about a focus on an inward focus on yourself often leads to mental health issues. Focusing on helping others leads to a tremendous amount of satisfaction and happiness and really solves mental health issues.
Mm-hmm. I've seen studies that support that as well. Well, we are, unfortunately, this is a great topic, but we are unfortunately over time. So do you have any final thoughts or comments on this topic?
Yeah, I think the beauty of entrepreneurship is that it requires, if you're going to be successful as an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur, it requires that you solve somebody else's problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're, whether you're doing it, whether you want to be an entrepreneur, an intrapreneur, a team member that's supporting the organization, if you focus on helping other folks solve their problems within your hedgehog overlap, there's a really high probability that within the IFMC, you're going to achieve some significant satisfaction and financial reward.
I completely agree. So, Greg, as always, thank you so much for your time. Everyone, sorry again about the technology issues yesterday. We will get word out about the December Equipped Live, and we will see everybody then. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you. Have a good evening.